As dads, some days we feel like we have all the answers, and some days we feel like we don't have a clue. If that describes you, you're at the right place. This is the All Pro Dad Podcast. Hey, you guys, I'm so excited today because I am joined with my dear friend, Dr. Jim Burns. Jim, how are you?
Very good. Nice to see you from afar.
My man is in Hawaii doing a speaking gig and stopped it to come hang out with us. So, Jim, thank you for doing that.
Hey, I'm thrilled I'd do it for you. I probably wouldn't do it for lots of people, but I also wanted you to see the cool surfboards here that I won't be surfing on.
Yeah, and for our listeners, there's a neon hang loose symbol in the back, sign in the back. I love it.
That's right. Oh, that's right. Only your YouTube people get to see our beautiful faces and my cool hang loose thing.
Well, that's what happens when you watch on YouTube. There's benefits all around.
Yeah.
Hey, let me tell our listeners, Jim Burns is the founder of HomeWord. He speaks to thousands of people all around the world each year. He has more than 3 million resources. Good grief. In print, over 20 languages. His popular HomeWord with Jim Burns podcast is on all major platforms. Jim writes and he speaks about strong marriages, confident parenting, and his popular books are Doing Life with Your Adult Children, which, by the way, is unbelievable. There's no book like it. Teaching Your Children Healthy Sexuality, Confident Parenting, and Creating an Intimate Marriage. But Jim, we're really excited for you to talk about today, A Student's Guide to Sexual Integrity, God's Plan for Sex in Your Body. He and his wife, Kathy, live in Southern California, have 3 grown daughters, 3 sons-in-laws, and I think it's three sons-in-law.
No, 3 sons-in-laws.
Yeah, that's how that works. And 4 grandchildren. Jim, thank you again for being here.
Hey, I'm thrilled to be with you. Anytime I get to hang out with Ted Lowe, I'm happy.
Well, you're getting your $50 worth right now, Jim. So thank you for that. Jim, each week we ask one question, and the question of the week is this: how and when do I talk to my kid about sex? Now, before we dive into that, I'm going to back way up. That was just a little teaser. That was a little preview. Because I want to back way up because I want our listeners to get to know you a little bit before we tackle that. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, I've got 3 daughters, so of course we have no hormones or drama in our life ever. That's a joke, by the way. And I'm really tied into my grandkids right now. I mean, what'll happen is the kids will come over to the house and I'll run up and go, James. And then my daughter will go, what am I, like, chopped liver? I'm here too. So I have to remember to even acknowledge them. Kathy and I have been married for 50 years. I know I look much younger.
You do.
But we just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. We have a high maintenance marriage. I've talked to you about this and we talk about it when we share on marriage. But what we've realized is that when we first got married, some dysfunction in both families, and we said, we're going to either recover or repeat, the sins of a previous generation. We decided to recover. It's been the best and maybe hardest thing we've ever done. And I have a passion for kids. Never thought I'd be writing another book for students, especially on sexuality. But because of the culture and life, it's just important, I think. I think it's one of the most important books I've ever written. And I just see this as so key. HomeWord, like you said, Ted, we have 4 values: strong marriages, confident parents, empowered kids. That's what we'll talk about today, and healthy leaders. And I love what I do. And actually, like I said, I'm here in Hawaii at Anchor Bible School, and it's a great place for young students. Most of them are like 19 and are doing kind of a gap year, and they do a great job.
I love that. Jim, I was thinking today, I don't think I've ever asked you this question as long as we've known each other. What made you become so passionate about working with marriages and families?
Well, it's interesting because yours and my mutual friend, Doug Fields, he was an intern for me at one time as I was the first youth pastor on the campus of what's now called Mariners in Southern California. And we used to say, these kids are getting a lot of help, but their parents are dropping them off and going to brunch. These parents need help. And we'd kind of joke about it. But then I realized, as I had a couple of times to be able to speak to parents and talk about their marriages, that this was more critical for me. And I went, there's a lot of people who can talk to kids. I was doing about 250,000 of them a year speaking, but I made a move. And in fact, even my literary agent said, Jim, you're crazy. You're in the youth ministry world. And I said, no, I've got to spend my life helping parents because it's really confusing out there. And it's not getting easier. It's getting a little bit even more complicated. So I made that move and, God's blessed it. And I'm really happy about that move. Even though my focus when I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking about kids. How do I help kids? I do it through parents, through marriages.
I mean, I think it's worked out for you, Jim. I think that decision is going to be okay. I think there's good signs that you made the right choice. So to dive into her question, when do I talk to my kid about sex? Did your parents talk to you about sex at all, Jim?
No, absolutely not.
No conversation.
I was in Atlanta last weekend. I was in your neighborhood and I was doing a marriage conference, and I asked, how many of you received good, positive, healthy, value-centered sex education from your parents when you were growing up? 3 people. One of them was the pastor, by the way, which was kind of cool. But 3 out of it's a pretty big church. Most parents didn't have their own parents talk to them, and that's the problem, because research says that all research, I mean, this is conservative, liberal, Christian, non-Christian, they all say that the more positive, value-centered sex education kids receive from their parents, the less promiscuous they'll be, but also the less confused. So we have a lot of kids who are confused today, partly because their parents never talked to them about it.
Right. And that's a thing. And I'll just start with this. Why do you think talking to our kids about sex is so awkward for the parent, in this case, the dad, and the kid?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is awkward. I mean, talking about sex is awkward. And, you take dads. Us dads are more awkward than even moms. Moms kind of have a heart for it. Dads are like, I don't know what to say. So a lot of times with dads, I tell them, don't sit face to face at the table. I mean, I have a friend who on the West Coast where I live, he took his 13-year-old son just recently during baseball season. They went to the San Diego Padres, Angels, Dodgers, on up to San Francisco, Oakland, and through the drive, they had all these great conversations and actually read this book that we're talking about, A Student's Guide to Sexual Integrity. And they read it, but they never looked at each other's face. He goes, it was so awesome. But that's probably a better thing for a dad to do.
Oh.
And I always say, I'd rather have 100 1-minute conversations than 100-minute conversations. So I think what that dad did, that's a life changer. That's a game changer. And again, he said there were awkward moments. He said, do you have any questions? And the kid after the first one goes, nope, I'm good. I don't want to talk about this.
So we mixed it in with activity.
Do you have any more questions? Nope,
no more questions. I remember asking, he was in the 5th grade at the time, because everyone's like, you got to prep him. You got to prep him for 6th grade. And we went on this father-dad, retreat. And I said, buddy, would you like to talk about sex? And he goes, I don't want to hear about that. And I don't want to know about that. And I was like, well, okay. Well, there you have it. And then the next year we were staying in the deck together and he's talking and he goes, can we talk about sex? I couldn't even believe you're bringing it up. I went, absolutely. Yeah. But he told me later I failed at it terribly. He wanted to know the mechanics and I talked about all the emotional part.
Oh yeah.
He said, no. I still didn't know anything more than when I asked you.
My daughter said that too. She said, Dad, you could talk to thousands of kids about sex and sexuality and not even break out into a sweat. When you talk to us, your bald head sweat, your ears turn red, you stuttered. So I just say to parents, look, it's going to be awkward. And I say it to kids. In fact, the first chapter of that book is called Awkward because it is something that's awkward.
Jim, what do you think your biggest concerns are when it comes to today's culture, when it comes to regarding sexuality and how it's affecting students and parents?
Yeah. Well, number one, that's the first place kids go to get sex education is the internet. And I love the internet. We're using it right now. I mean, media is awesome, but the truth is that I'm not going to trust a TikTok influencer. I'm not going to necessarily trust, Instagram or some of the things where kids are getting their information today. YouTube, you can see pornography on YouTube. It'd be what they'd call soft porn, but it's there. So I think the mistake is that in culture, the culture shouts at us and the culture changes its mind. And so the question I always ask kids is, are you going to listen to the culture, which is changing its mind rapidly, or are you going to listen to the master designer? An illustration that my friend Erin Masha, who you probably know, gave about this. She actually put it in we have a really cool course on this for kids. And Erin said this. She said, if you go to an art exhibit, are you going to listen to what all the people think about the masterpiece, the art, or are you going to listen to the master designer who's there, who's kind of explaining it? Of course, you're going to listen to the master designer. The problem is that because culture is shouting and culture is so confused, we've got kids who are really confused, especially middle schoolers. Oh my gosh. They're so confused when it comes to these issues because they're spending so much time on social media. I watched the All Pro Dad podcast on YouTube with you and the two other guys on social media. And, the hours that you were talking about is amazing. So then you have all of this shouting, and then you have a little tiny bit of conversation about the master designer. But even when parents aren't talking about it, or parents aren't safe because they didn't talk about it. So you asked the question at the beginning on what age, and I always tell people it's 3 to 5. It's not when you talk about heavy duty stuff, but you say, God made your body, God made boys, and God made girls. Name the body parts, things like that, because now you're the safe person if you're the dad or you're the mom. And for us, it's awkward, but for a 3 to 5 year old, it's not even awkward. 6 to 10, they'll ask a lot of questions. Those are the years where they ask the questions. They're not going to ask as many questions in the teens, but if they're 6 to 10, you answer their questions. So that's the kind of thing. That's why I think it's so key that we become the safe people to help them navigate this culture. So there you go.
So when they're feeling this awkwardness, because you think about a kid, just their sexuality, and when they start sensing it for the first time, and which is really, really young, right? So what you're saying is we want to be the safe people that they come to go, when I'm confused about anything, right? We want them to come to us.
Yeah. I mean, if you're spending time with them and you're willing to talk about it and not lecture, preach, be toxic, and we do that sometimes. But if you're willing to do that, then you're going to have, those kids will constantly have conversations. I mean, we honestly, because we did this, we didn't do everything right in parenting. I'll just tell you, this we did pretty good. And Kathy better than me. But our girls, they started sharing things like even in the teen years, and then in college, I'm like, could you not share that or ask that question, please? I'm the one who's like goofy with it. But she said, we were the safest people to talk about.
Because you guys were so open with them about it, and you started early, and you had those conversations with them.
And again, you have to keep your mouth shut because you want to preach, lecture. You're scared to death of what's going on in the culture, but you can't be negative about it. That's why I think we need a way to redesign the way we talk about it, because they're going to have doubts. They're going to have issues, and we can't shame them into making this. That's what a previous culture did, Christian culture, and that didn't work. I feel like we went too far in the shame department, in the guilt department, made kids feel so bad that you had to choose, am I going to have a sexual thought, or am I going to love God? And I can't do both. And so what happened was they kind of went, well, God seems like a really Grinch. I'm going to go this other way. And and a lot of people have a lot of damage with that. But I think it's really possible for us to re-communicate this and not have kids all freaked out like a previous generation.
Jim, one of my favorite moments with you as a communicator, and you know what I'm going to say, right? You know what I'm going to say, is we're at this big, huge conference for family ministry and children's ministry and students. Right. And you had the audience shout back penis and vagina. And it was so funny. I'm bent double at this thing. But you had a really great point based on this really extraordinary moment. Talk about that.
And again, it wasn't part of my talk. It just came out. And I'm like, oh, man, I'll never be invited back to speak to these 8,000 people. But actually, the previous speaker had them yell out, in the image of God. And so I'm talking about getting comfortable with body parts, talking to kids, being the safe people. And so I said, you know what? Every little boy has a penis. I said, it's probably the first time from this stage anybody has ever said that word. And I said, you know what? On the count of 3, let's yell it. So on the count of 3, these people went nuts and they said penis. And I said, let's give, a vagina cheer. And so we kind of did it. Later, I walked off stage, and one of the other communicators who was going to come up, who's actually kind of a comedian, he said, you're trending right now on social media. And I said, here for the conference? He goes, no, you're trending nationally, because all these people went, Jim Burns just led us in this chair. But actually, Ted, what I was trying to do was help those people get comfortable having conversations. For example, 80% of child sexual assaults are with people that they know, kids know. And if they can't name a body part, sometimes they just throw that out, in law, in a court of law. So, I think it's important that we let them know the right terminology, There's more to it than that. But, how do we get comfortable with that? I mean, we never get comfortable, but it is important for us to have those conversations so that the kids at least feel comfortable and safe talking to mom and dad. And especially dads. Here we are thinking about dads today. Dads oftentimes are not comfortable with their own sexuality, or they're struggling with their own issues, say pornography or whatever. And so they really don't want to have those conversations with their kids. And so when they have open, honest conversations at whatever the age that's of age development, I think it's important that they do that so that then the kids feel safe with dad. I found some of the better conversations, Kathy and I said, sometimes came from dad, not mom, with my girls.
Well, and I think too, naming it when you're talking about, between 3 and 5, you said you start there. Right. I feel like that's one of the things you start with, right? That's what this body part, because a kid, they're not thrown off at that point. This is your penis and this is your vagina.
Yeah, they're not even awkward about it at 3
Not
or 5.
at all. And hey, let's have the parts that would eventually become awkward or feel, and I didn't do a great job with our first one with this. I called it his schnitzel. and he comes home from kindergarten. He goes, Dad, the other kids don't call it schnitzel. He was so betrayed. So I rewound with his brother on that one. We did not go that route.
And you went to wing-a-ding-ding or something like that?
Yeah, we're going to get serious with wing-a-ding-ding. That's exactly what we're going to do. You do, there's a chapter called The Dangers of Pornography. You state that porn addiction starts out with casual, almost innocent curiosity. Talk about that.
Well, we're all curious about that stuff. And at a certain age, for example, age 10 for boys, age 11.8 for girls, they're going to see pornography. I mean, that's what you can Google me on that. That's what they say. So, you're a 10-year-old boy. You could be a 10-year-old boy raised in the church if you're, and yet if somebody says, do you want to see Miley Cyrus with her top off here on YouTube? They're not even on a porn site. I mean, how many 10-year-old boys are going to say, no, that's okay. Most of them are going to say it. So they're going to see it. They're going to view it. So it's casual. It just bumped up. Today, if they're on internet, I mean, you can type in pretty innocent words in a search engine and you're going to find slang or whatever. And all of a sudden you see, pornography. So what happens is they view it and their mind takes a picture of it. And then they move to more of an addiction and then escalation. Then they get desensitized and then they begin to act it out. Typically they're acting it out in their mind first with pornography. Maybe they're looking at pornography on a, some kind of device. But then they want to act it out. So what we're finding in colleges is that for many people with their first sexual experience, it's they're acting out and if you're on YouTube, you can see this. I'm putting quotes in here because they call it art, the art of pornography. I think that's really sad because that's a false sense of intimacy.
So they're acting out what they've seen, that this is what sex looks like. This is how. Right. So how do we talk to our kids in a healthy way about pornography?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have to help them learn to guard their hearts. And one of the phrases that we talk a lot about in that book is guard your heart. The Bible says guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. We also talk about your mind, renew your mind. And I tell kids all the time, did in the book, your greatest, most powerful sex organ is not your private parts, it's your mind. So you help them understand that, because a lot of parents don't want to talk about it because they go, oh, if we talk about pornography, then our kids are going to go be really curious and they're going to go look for it. Research does not show that. Research shows that you kind of demystified it for them. And I think, age 10, if they're going to see pornography, probably age 10, age 11 is the time to have those conversations. It even may be too late. And we don't do that as parents. We don't put that energy, again, because it's awkward. And yet we're mad at the culture because they're more than willing to talk about it.
So there's constant conversations from culture that's saying this, that's communicating this.
Yeah.
We're always talking on this podcast, Jim, about dads having good, open conversations about being safe, be the safest place in the world. And I'm thinking, wow, this is the one that we probably have the least amount of conversations about and need to have the most conversations about.
Yeah. But how I did it with my kids is I started as a dad. I found that as they got a little older, I was having more trouble with it. So I started taking them out on dates, and it was always around food for some reason. Maybe that's why my belly is bigger than I want it to be. But, it was over breakfast burrito at A's Burgers, not a great breakfast burrito in Dana Point, California, where I live, not good for the diet. And Christy all of a sudden would bring up something, or I found myself, they didn't want to talk about their deal. I would say, hey, what do the kids think about?
Oh, that's good.
Transgender. What do the kids think about, and I'd kind of name different things as they got older, more of the sexual system type stuff and whatnot. They would be willing to talk about those kids at their school more than they would just be willing to talk about themselves at first.
Oh, that's fascinating. What a great piece of application. Say, hey, what are kids thinking about? It doesn't feel as personal. And that takes away the awkward piece. A lot of it seems like.
Another thing Kathy and I did really practical is we made a list. We live at the beach. And so we would go to the beach, we'd sit in our beach chairs, and we both had yellow notepads. We didn't even put them on our iPads. And we would write education, sexuality, faith journey. And, we had about 5 or 6 things. And then we'd say, for the next 6 months, what do we want to deal with each of our children? Because they were in different phases. They were 2 years apart. And then we'd be watching a television show, and all of a sudden, Kathy would look at me, and the look was, put it on pause. This is the time we're supposed to talk about. And I don't know why she always looked at me, but most of the time it was me. I don't want to talk about masturbation. Okay. But what do you guys think about what they just said? So now it's impersonal because I'm not asking them about them. And sometimes they would go, Dad, that's ridiculous. Watch the show. We don't want to do this. I remember watching the MTV Awards with them when 2 women kissed for the first time. It was a big deal on MTV. This dates me. And pause. What do you guys think of that? And so we had an incredible conversation, but it wasn't about them personally, although it was, because they were sharing what they believed too. And they didn't always agree with what my kids now as adults, they don't always agree with everything that I think. Christy said when she was in college, I had to disown my parents' faith to own my own faith. Well, now we go to the same church and the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. But there was a season there where she was kind of going through that emerging adulthood. Am I going to believe what my parents believe? Am I going to believe what my youth group leader talked to me about? And we found that she could talk to us about some of her doubts. We would freak out in our bedroom, talking to each other. We didn't try to ever freak out with her too much.
Jim, you say in the research that the more positive, valued-centered sex education that kids have, the better they're going to respond sexually or not be as confused. Talk about that.
Well, it is a proven fact. And again, we have a lot of secular research that shows this, Ted, that when parents do have those dialogues, and when they do talk about it, not from one talk, but from those 100 talks we're talking about, that, that kids will listen to you more. Listening is the language of love. And so part of just even talking about sex and sexuality is kind of listening to what they think and how they feel. And so that's one of the reasons why we created a student's guide to sexual integrity, is because parents kind of don't know what to say or do because they didn't have it role modeled. So the beauty is to say, hey, we're going to kind of go through some of this stuff together. And it doesn't have to be that book. I mean, there's other great things out there. But I'm just saying, today, we parents are going to allow the culture to speak into our kids' life, and we're going to just remain silent, or we're going to whine and complain about it? No. So we have research on our side that even though it'll be awkward at times, even though it won't always go perfect, it's really much better to do that. And who agree? Where do liberals and conservatives agree? Where do Christians and non-Christians agree? Now, the liberals may disagree on the outcome, but they do agree that when you have these conversations with a parent, that now the kids will be willing to, to have some of those, safe, if you would, conversations. But don't expect it to go perfect. Expect it to go sideways sometimes. And, when we interviewed, Kathy took our girls at age 11 away, and Christy totally dialogued, our oldest, with Kathy. The next one was Becca, and she said, Mom, stop reading. Kathy kept reading, and she goes, Mom, God wants you to stop reading this book, which she pulled the God card. And then Heidi goes, hey, I know everything. My sister's already told me, but I want to go out on that. I want to go away, and hopefully you'll buy me a new outfit. So everyone is going to be different, right. But just trying, and especially dads. Oh my gosh. If dads will have some of those conversations, their kids are really waiting to hear what dad has to say about this. And so dads have to just buckle up and say, look, it's awkward. I'm sorry, but here you go.
Well, I love that, Jim. And I think what you've done, I get excited about what we've learned with dads and husbands, as you and I have done this for a long time, is a lot of times dads will say, I'll do the right thing. Tell me what it is, or just tell me what to do. Sometimes don't live in theory land, just tell me what to do. And the thing I love about this book, that guys can get this book and say, okay, now I feel like I know what to do. Yeah. And you're not promising, hey, then these are going to make conversations that are smooth and easy and perfect. But man, it is such a powerful structure that you've given people. Jim, each week we give our listeners what we call the pro move. Which is just one simple but powerful thing that they can try this week.
Yeah.
In your mind, and I know this will vary with age, but in your mind or through your research, what would you say? What's that pro move of the week you can give our listeners?
You know what? I think it's a really practical move, and I think we already talked about it. I think you ask them, what do you think about? Fill in the blank. Now, if you've got a 3 to 5 year old, it's going to be very different because you're not really talking about sexuality. You're talking about their body,
right?
Things like that. If you've got a 6 to 9 year old, they'll have a question or whatever. But what do you think about? And then once you get to 10, I think it's really important that you say, what do you think about? And you talk about culture, some of the other things too, but don't have a planned response. Listen to them, because one of the ways a dad can help their children is by really listening and feeling. Then the kids go, you know what, Dad listens. God is real because Dad is listening to me. And they want your wisdom, but they don't want your lecture. They want you to listen.
Say that again.
And respond. They want your wisdom, but they don't want you to lecture. They want to talk too. Kids learn best when they talk, not when you talk, dads. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's good. This will be way more of a listener than, hey, I've got the latest tip and trick here, but just to listen. Hey, you can talk to me. I'm safe about this.
Yeah.
Jim, I could talk to you all day, period, but I could talk to you about this today. Thank you for pausing your trip in Hawaii to be with us. I knew when I reached out, I thought he'll do it because he's so passionate about this. He's a dear friend. He loves the Lord and he loves kids and helping parents. So thank you, sir.
Hey, my pleasure. You wouldn't have got me to next week because we're on family vacation here in Hawaii. But this week, being at Anchor, Bible school is wonderful. And people might want to even look at what they're doing there. It's just awesome what they're doing. It's a gap year, learning the Bible, learning about practical issues. I'm talking to them about relationships. So they're 19-year-olds, a lot of them. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow.
I love it. Jim, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Great to be with you, Ted. Always. Thanks for what you're doing. And thanks so much for All Pro Dad. It's just a great organization that's reaching so many people with important messages.
Thanks for listening to the All Pro Dad podcast. All Pro Dad is the fatherhood program of the nonprofit Family First. Along with our motherhood program, iMom, we exist to help you love your family well. Subscribe to our daily email, the All Pro Dad Play of the Day, by going to allprodad.com/subscribe and get daily powerful and practical fatherhood tips in your inbox. The All Pro Dad podcast is hosted by me, Ted Lowe, produced by Bobby Lewis.